Hello and welcome back to the Real Talk Podcast. With you as always is your host, Matt Began, with
Vicky Pierre.
Joining us today is our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Nikolai Vitti. Dr. Vitti, how are you doing?
Good. Hello to both of you.
Well, Dr. Vitti, this has really been a long process with these boundary and program proposals. Can you explain when the process started for the boundary changes and what that process entailed before arriving to your final recommendations?
Sure. So the process actually occurred around this time last year, more internally with reviewing enrollment trends, residential rates in certain neighborhoods, academic performance now and long-term, reviewing schools that were facing state sanction or could face state sanction, and just what programs would be more attractive to parents and students. All of that started, again, about this time last year, moved into one-on-one meetings with board members, and then into a workshop type setting where all the board was there into June and July of the summer before the beginning of this past school year. It's been a long process, and it's been a long process deliberately so to make sure that stakeholders are engaged, the community's engaged, that their voice is heard, that the proposals are understood, and then finally voted on by the school board.
So what factors did you consider when you made your initial and then also the final recommendations? And judging by some of the feedback we're getting, a lot of people feel that these were centered or geared directly towards the urban core of our community.
Sure. Many of the proposals were focused on the urban core because that's where many of the factors or challenges that we're trying to overcome surfaced. In particular, all of the boundary changes, for the most part, try to address low enrollment at schools, which is coupled with low utilization, meaning that the number of seats are not used to educate children based on the original design or construction of the building. We're also looking at school performance, mainly linked to school grades, short-term and long-term. And then linked to that are state sanctions. When schools continue to be DNF schools over time, then the state requires us to close those schools, convert the schools to charter schools, or change the program, the boundary of those schools to do something differently for students that are in schools that are lower performing. We're also looking at trends of students leaving schools, leaving certain schools for other schools for programmatic reasons, and then trying to think differently about what programs would bring neighborhood students back to those schools or students outside of that neighborhood to that school as well. So all of those factors were considered in order to come up with boundary proposals or programmatic proposals that would bring neighborhood students and non-neighborhood students back to schools that were low enrolled, low utilized, and often low performing. When we look at all of the boundary changes, although many were concentrated in the urban core, several were not. The board approved changes to Wolfson High School, Ed White High School, Hyde Grove, Hyde Park, Oak Hill. Those are not in the traditional urban core. So there were schools that were facing challenges linked to enrollment, utilization, residential trends, as far as school-age children are concerned. So it was not just a process that focused on urban core schools, but a series of factors that were applied to all schools, even outside of the urban core. But the reality is those factors that were analyzed often were most relevant and consistent within the urban core.
And so how have stakeholders been involved in this process?
Well, board policy requires stakeholders to be involved in the process, namely through the working groups. So board policy stated that the school district had to work with the school level principals to identify stakeholders that represent the school. Those stakeholders could be teachers, parents, community members, faith-based individuals linked to the schools, nonprofits, the business community or business partners, students. All those individuals on some level were requested to participate on the various working groups. Some took on that responsibility and had opportunities, others did not, but we did stay true to board policy to ensure stakeholders were involved in considering the initial proposals, and they had the opportunity to reject, approve, or modify the recommendations that were originally offered to the schools that were targeted for changes. And then in addition to that, we've engaged stakeholders through community meetings, public hearings before votes were taken by the school board to continually hear from stakeholders as far as what they liked about the proposal, what they didn't, and what do they want to see done differently regarding the proposals. But I do feel that we have been consistently transparent, but also consistently responsive to questions and issues. Now, that doesn't mean that engaging the community and stakeholders means doing what they want you to do. I think that there's a difference between actively listening, authentically listening, and then doing what people want you to do. I think that we have listened, we've been responsive, we've even made tweaks and modifications. I know I have to my original recommendations, but there is a difference between actively and authentically listening and doing what people tell you they want you to do.
Okay, so this is a portion of the podcast where now we're going to break out each of the boundaries and the proposed changes. So we'll start off with the R.V. Daniels and Susie Tolbert boundary change. Why are they part of this process?
So these two schools were not a part of the original set of schools that were identified for changes. Stakeholders linked to R.V. Daniels and Susie Tolbert attended the working group process for the R.L. Brown change, and their concern was that if R.L. Brown was converted into a gifted dedicated magnet, then students that currently attend and parents that send their children to R.V. Daniels and Susie Tolbert will leave the two schools and instead attend the gifted program at R.L. Brown, the new one that was recently approved by the board. So with their concerns addressed, when the R.L. Brown working group made their recommendation to approve the recommendation to convert R.L. Brown, they also attached a recommendation to consider converting Susie Tolbert to a dedicated magnet. And then ultimately my recommendation was to convert R.V. Daniels, which is a sister school, to Susie Tolbert. The reason why R.V. Daniels was selected instead of Susie Tolbert, again, they're sister schools. Students are served at the K2 level at R.V. Daniels, and then the 3-5 level, the K2 students or the second grade students go to Susie Tolbert, and both are considered non-dedicated, gifted, and talented magnets. So we chose R.V. Daniels for the dedicated magnet as far as the proposal is concerned, because you already have young children at R.V. Daniels, so they just continue to stay there. It's also what we consider an inside school, so the classrooms are not outside, which is more conducive to educating smaller children, so kindergarten children instead of an outside school like Susie Tolbert. And that was the rationale why we picked R.V. Daniels instead of Susie Tolbert as far as the dedicated, gifted, and talented school is concerned.
And so why make changes to these schools if they are doing well academically?
And it's a legitimate question and one that has been asked. We are listening and considering the recommendation made by the R.L. working group, influenced by many of the gifted and talented parents that are associated with R.V. Daniels and Susie Tolbert. They have been requesting for quite some time to have a dedicated gifted and talented program at R.V. Daniels and Susie Tolbert, so this isn't anything new. So we are following up as far as a proposal on what was historically recommended. In addition to that, we know that the demand for gifted and talented programming is not being met by the supply as far as Duval County Public Schools is concerned. It's been mentioned many times that there's a 400 student waiting list at Jacks Beach. Many of those students do not return to our school system. They go to charter schools, private schools, so there's an opportunity to capture those 400 students and many more that don't even apply to Jacks Beach because they live on the other side of town. So another reason for the proposal is to expand gifted and talented magnet programming, which is in high demand by parents, low supply as far as what we're offering as a school district. We also believe that the change would lead to long-term sustainability for both schools. RV Daniels right now is at about 65% utilized. This change would bring RV Daniels to 100% utilized. In addition, Susie Tolbert is at about 60% utilized right now, and it would bring Susie Tolbert to about 80%, if not higher, with the other boundary changes that I know we'll talk about later. So in other words, it allows both schools to be more used at capacity, which is also obviously a factor, as we talked about earlier, that's considered when you're thinking about programmatic or boundary changes in order to better utilize schools. Also, RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert are in residential areas that are not seeing much growth. So residents are not moving into the area, and they're not necessarily having large numbers of school-age children. So if you look at the surrounding area where there are other elementary schools positioned, which are lower performing than RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert, but going through series of boundary changes and programmatic changes, it's only realistic to think that that challenge could eventually spread or touch RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert as far as low utilization, low enrollment. There's also a reality that the gifted and talented teachers, parents and students will leave both schools for R.L. Brown. So we're also trying to be pragmatic and keep parents involved at RV Daniels and not go to R.L. Brown, and keep teachers that are gifted endorsed to stay at RV Daniels, Susie Tolbert, in this case RV Daniels, to lead to a long-term sustainable plan from an enrollment point of view, from a utilization point of view, and also from an academic performance point of view, considering the performance of Susie Tolbert over the years.
Was there a working group for RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert? And if there was, what kind of stuff did you learn from them with their feedback?
Yes, there was a working group for RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert. It was created after the recommendation was submitted by R.L. Brown to consider the dedication of the RV Daniels Susie Tolbert gifted program. So that working group approved the recommendation to convert RV Daniels to a dedicated magnet on an 11-2 vote.
Okay, so let's get into it a little bit more detailed. What is your final recommendation regarding RV Daniels and Susie Tolbert?
So the final recommendation is that RV Daniels be a K-5 dedicated, gifted, and talented school, and Susie Tolbert remains a 3-5 school, eventually adding a 6th grade, not this upcoming year, but the following year, which would be the 17-18 school year, and that the boundary of Susie Tolbert include the grades 3, 4, and 5 from West Jacks, and grades 3, 4, and 5 from SP Livingston. And that eventually the boundary for RV Daniels, which is currently the K2, move to SP Livingston, which SP Livingston would become an early learning center. I think it's important to note that under the current proposal, any student currently at RV Daniels or Susie Tolbert, whether they're gifted and talented or a neighborhood student, or accessing the magnet even if they're not from the neighborhood or gifted and talented, can automatically enroll at RV Daniels as a K-5 dedicated magnet. So that has been an ongoing question. There is no criteria to enter RV Daniels, neither now or into the future, and every student at RV Daniels is, in other words, grandfathered in, and so are the students at Susie Tolbert if they'd rather go to RV Daniels than Susie Tolbert based on the change. In addition, students that are in the pre-K program at RV Daniels automatically have access to RV Daniels this upcoming year as rising kindergartners.
So what happens to students currently attending both of these schools?
So the students at both schools have the opportunity to go to either school. So the students currently at RV Daniels can stay at RV Daniels. The students at Susie Tolbert can stay at Susie Tolbert or transition or transfer to RV Daniels.
So we heard this during the last board meeting when dealing with magnetizing schools. Why create another dedicated magnet for gifted and talented students when we already have R.L. Brown?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially considering the proximity between R.V. Daniels and R.L. Brown. One reason for the creation of 2 dedicated elementary schools that focus on gifted and talented is we have a shortage of gifted and talented elementary schools that are dedicated. We only have one right now, Jacks Beach, and certainly the demand our supply is not keeping up with demand. So there are quite a few number of students and parents that apply to Jacks Beach that don't enter Jacks Beach because there are not enough seats, and there are plenty that would still like even more options outside of Jacks Beach and don't even apply to Jacks Beach because they live so far away from Jacks Beach. So we're creating 2 because we know that the demand is high at the elementary level, but the supply is low. So that's one reason. The other reason is that we do not want to see R.V. Daniels or Susie Tolbert not receive what they were committed to receive years ago, which is a dedicated program. We don't want to see the gifted program as a non-dedicated magnet program dismantled because the teachers there and parents that are currently there leave for R.L. Brown, and that is what would likely to happen. We do not want to, in other words, to say it directly, kill the gifted program at R.V. Daniels or Susie Tolbert, but not converting it to a dedicated magnet. And the reality is that many of the gifted and talented students, their parents will leave for R.L. Brown if the school, one of the 2 schools, is not dedicated. Again, one, this was previously discussed and committed to. Secondly, I do think it's important to meet the demand of our parents. And thirdly, we need more gifted and talented programming to stay competitive with charter schools and private schools. All parents have options. Gifted and talented parents have options. And unfortunately, they have used charter schools and private schools to receive what they would like their children to receive from a programmatic point of view. And so we think we can address multiple problems and challenges with this proposal. Maintain the positive culture, support, and reputation of R.V. Daniels while building a new gifted and talented program at R.L. Brown, where, again, we're just continuing to supply the demand for more gifted and talented programming at the elementary level.
So I know a lot of parents want to know, what will the entry requirements be for R.V. Daniels?
So there will be no entry requirements. Parents will be required to submit an application, whether they are their child is gifted and talented or from the neighborhood. R.V. Daniels would continue its priority status, and so those parents whose children are in the neighborhood, the original boundary neighborhood of R.V. Daniels, would have priority. And we would continue with that process, and then gifted or non-gifted students can access the program at R.V. Daniels.
You mentioned that in a few minutes ago about the 16-17 school year will not have the 6th grade yet. So will students going into it when it starts in 17-18, will they be required, if they're 5th graders, will they be required to stay there to continue on to the 6th grade?
No, it'll be an option that will be provided to the current 5th graders that are at Susie Tolbert next year as far as their proposal. So just to be clear, next year's 5th graders in the 16-17 school year will be offered the opportunity to remain at the school as 6th graders, and then when they are finished as 6th graders, they can go to their neighborhood middle school, or they can access a magnet program. But that is the vision, to create that continuity with 6th graders. And the reason for that is we've seen quite a bit of success at the reading and math level with increasing the K-5 model and including 6th grade. 6th graders are doing better in the elementary setting as 6th graders than they are as 6th graders at the middle school building.
And what will be done to support Susie Tolbert if gifted students no longer attend the school?
Yeah, and this is a firm commitment of the administration to make sure that Susie Tolbert continues to see the academic improvement that it has shown. A couple things will be done. We will be sustaining our instructional coaches at Susie Tolbert to support teachers. We will be building a PITSCO STEM lab at Susie Tolbert for all the students to access. We will be funding a full-time nurse at the school to create continuity with the Newtown Success Zone work that happens at SP Livingston. We will also negotiate with a memo of understanding with the teachers union in order to have all the teachers at Susie Tolbert trained as gifted and talented teachers. So in other words, they'll be gifted endorsed. We're not trying to build a gifted program at Susie Tolbert, but this ensures that students that are not, quote, gifted will be exposed to the same kind of strategies, rationale, thought process when creating lesson plans through their regular instruction in the core areas. We also will be providing Susie Tolbert with a behavior interventionist to work with at-risk students or those students that are misbehaving and continually in trouble from a behavioral point of view. We also will have a parent liaison at Susie Tolbert to work with our parents, especially those that would be transitioning to the school. And then lastly, City Year will be moved from SP Livingston to Susie Tolbert. And as many of us know, City Year offers young, energetic, idealistic individuals that work with students on a day-to-day basis as mentors, and they support the students in reading and math interventions, but also in behavioral issues as well.
You mentioned SP Livingston, so let's go ahead and move on to the next group of schools, which is going to be West Jacksonville and SP Livingston. Why were these schools identified for the boundary change?
We'll start with SP Livingston. SP Livingston was identified for a number of different reasons. One, the long-term low performance of the school. SP Livingston has been a D or an F, or would have been D and F if not for hold harmless 13 out of 16 years since school grades were provided. In addition to that, it right now is functioning at a very low utilization of about 52% right now. You also have 44% of parents that should be going to SP Livingston opting out. So in other words, neighborhood parents are not seeing the school at scale as a viable option for their children. And we're continuing to see low performance, which is a problem for individual children, but also a problem for the state as far as state sanctions are concerned for the school. We're not necessarily able to recruit students from the outside to go to SP Livingston under the current configuration. So those were the factors that were considered for SP Livingston. For West Jacks, very similar. History of low performance, specifically of the last 16 years of school grades. West Jacks has been a D or F, or would have been a D or an F 10 out of 16 years. It has been an F school now for 3 years straight. It is also facing state sanctions. Right now, West Jacks is functioning at 42% utilized, and 40% of the parents that should be attending West Jacks are opting out of the school. So very similar to SP Livingston, hard to rebuild the school or to build up a school where the residents that should be going to West Jacks are opting out and not necessarily well positioned to recruit students from the outside, considering the reputation of the school. And then in addition, the state is expecting us to do things differently from a design point of view because of its low performance over the years.
So explain to us the difference between your original recommendation, the working group's recommendations, and your final recommendations for both of these schools.
So this is an example of true evolution from the initial recommendation to where we are right now. for all the reasons that I just spoke to, as far as the factors that were considered were applied to West Jacks and SP Livingston. The original recommendation was that West Jacks would be an early learning center and SP Livingston would be a 3-5. So they would be sister schools. The working group rejected that recommendation and instead recommended that West Jacks be a dedicated elementary school focused on STEM, and that SP Livingston be converted to a non-dedicated magnet focused on leadership. Part of that vote included a minority vote to convert West Jacksonville to a overage school for overage students. So just to be clear, those are students that are 2 years or more outside of their age cohort. And those students typically struggle academically, but especially behaviorally. And there's a concentration of those students in the urban core. So in considering that, the recommendation of the working group, it just was not clear that a dedicated magnet STEM program would recruit students from the neighborhood and outside. The reality is there's just not enough neighborhood students to recruit to West Jacks, even as a dedicated magnet, and STEM as a focus at the elementary level has not necessarily recruited students from outside the boundary. In addition, we're also making other changes to schools like R.L. Brown or even R.V. Daniels with the dedication of elementary schools as dedicated magnets, that it'll be hard for West Jacks to compete with those schools because of the historical low performance of West Jacks. But at the same time, I think the working group, or at least a member of the working group, highlighted a gap and a need, which is more overage support for overage students. And looking at that and also considering the cost of converting West Jacks to the Early Learning Center, with it being a 2-story school, and when you're working with children that are of young age, they need to be on the first floor and have ready access to a bathroom and a playground. It made sense for SP Livingston to be the Early Learning Center because it is just a 1-floor school, and they have plenty of space as far as classrooms that can be used, that with bathrooms that can be used for the primary. So with all that considered, the final recommendation was to convert SP Livingston to an early learning center. That means adding the Head Start programming to SP Livingston, starting with 3-year-olds, and we will be able to hand select the teachers for that program. So we are looking for fully certified teachers that have an elementary certification along with paras all the way up to 2nd grade. And then West Jacks would be used as an overage school for not only middle school students that would be coming from the now JWJ ACT Center, but also 4th and 5th graders that are overage at the elementary level. There would also be a boundary change so that the students currently at West Jacks at the K2 level would go to SP Livingston, and those students that are in grades 3, 4, and 5 at West Jacks would go to to Susie Tolbert, and then those students from grades 3, 4, and 5 at SP Livingston would go to Susie Tolbert.
So what is the benefit of moving the middle school overage center to West Jacksonville?
Well, West Jacksonville, as the home of the overage center, ensures its long-term placement within the Duval County public school system. Because of low residential rates, not an increase in school-age children in the area, a history of low performance, by converting West Jacks to the overage center for middle school students, it ensures that that building is kept for educational purposes and tied to Duval County Public Schools. The school will also function as a outreach center for the parents and the community. We will be moving the JWJ ACT full-service school from that building to West Jacks. We will also be housing more parent academy sessions at West Jacks to reach out to parents in the community. And so the school becomes viable long-term, even though you have lower number of residents, lower number of children that are school age that would attend school. it positions the school to be sustainable as far as educational purposes are concerned.
And would the services that are provided by the Newtown Initiative be disrupted due to these changes?
No. So the Newtown initiatives would continue at SB Livingston, and we can argue extended to younger children because of the early learning initiative. And then the nurse that currently works with students at SB Livingston and at Butler Middle would stay there, and we would fund another full-time nurse at Susie Tolbert to work with students that originally would have been at SB Livingston in grades 3, 4, and 5. So they would be serviced and supported at Susie Tolbert instead of being supported at SP Livingston. I think one of the focuses of the Newtown initiative is narrowing the achievement gap. And I think when you look at the purpose of the Early Learning Center, it's exactly to do that, to narrow the achievement gap. By working with children starting at 3 years old with fully certified teachers and offering a continuation and a continuity of academic and behavioral support starting at the 3-year-old level, I think we can overcome a lot of the challenges that we see in the Newtown area linked to poverty, low educational background and exposure of our parents. Limited parent involvement and engagement academically. I think we can overcome all of that by working with children at a younger age, and then they will be more ready by the time they go into 3rd grade, which they'll be passed on to Susie Tolbert, hopefully, and I believe more ready for learning in reading and math because of the deep work that will happen at SP Livingston instead of trying to do both, which we often do in Title I elementary schools, which is try to focus on the primary and the intermediary at the same time. Very hard to do both when students are so far behind.
What happens to the EBD students that are already at SP Livingston?
So they'll remain at SP Livingston. They have already a separate part of the building that's specifically constructed for those students. That would remain at SP Livingston. We will obviously have inclusion opportunities for those students based on their IEP at the kindergarten through 2nd grade level, and those students at the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade level, if they are in an inclusion model based on their IEP, then they would do that in the surrounding schools in the area.
What is the rationale behind an early learning center at SP Livingston, and what does that look like?
So we talked earlier about narrowing the achievement gap, but the intent is to do quite a few things dynamically different than how we have traditionally been working with students that are growing up in poverty at the primary level. So by creating an early learning center, we can create complete intentionality and purpose and focus on early learning because those teachers will not be burdened by the state standardized test. They can go deep with interventions behaviorally and academically. The Early Learning Center will start at the 3-year-old level with Head Start and then move up to ultimately 2nd grade. We will work with our teachers union on a memo of understanding to hand select teachers so that they want to be a part of it. They're passionate about that work. We are going to provide every grade level from kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade with a reading interventionist that's a fully certified teacher to work with students in smaller groups. We will have a partnership with Any Given Child to train all of our music art teachers and the core teachers in arts integration. We have a exciting rainforest curriculum where students will go outside to learn about the curriculum, but by being outside and being a part of nature. There is a woods area right by SP Livingston that's ideal for that work. In addition, we are likely to have all of our teachers from 3-year-old level to the 2nd grade trained in Orton Gillingham. That's a multisensory approach to mainly teaching reading that we're using at GRASP, and that works for all students, not just dyslexic students. So that way our teachers are well trained to think in a different way of engaging all students in reading and math. In addition to that, we will be providing ongoing coaching with our teachers so that they are constantly supported and trained. The school will have a parent liaison, a behavior interventionist to work with students that are not on the right track behaviorally, and an outreach to parents that are not engaged or participating enough in their child's education. So all of these things mean that we're doing things differently at the early learning level with more intentionality, more focus to make sure that these students in particular are ready by the time they go into third grade. And we have not been able to do that consistently, especially in our elementary Title I schools, and these particular schools in particular, considering their performance over the years.
So with all these changes, one thing that comes to mind is going to be transportation, taking students from one school, then they got to get on another bus and go to another school. How is that going to look from maybe a cost standpoint or just a strategic standpoint? How does that happen?
Well, the reality is that when you look at these 4 schools in particular, R.V. Daniels, Susie Tolbert, West Jacks, and S.P. Livingston, they're all within 2 miles radius of one another. So specifically, Tolbert to S.P. Livingston is about 1.2 miles. We know that Tolbert and R.V. Daniels are right across the street from one another. Tolbert to West Jacks is 1.8 miles apart. West Jacks to Livingston is about 0.7 miles. And then West Jacks to R.V. Daniels is about 1.9 or 2 miles away from one another. So these schools are relatively close to one another. Many of our larger elementary schools have boundaries that expand beyond 2 miles. And so for these particular students, the bus pickup will be reduced from 1.5 to 1 miles. And if we have siblings that once we're in the same school, the parent can elect to transfer their student through the special transfer process to another school, so siblings can go to school with one another. But if they have one student, let's say at SP Livingston, and another student at Susie Tolbert, the bus pickup will work that the younger child will be dropped off, for example, at SP Livingston, and the older sibling will be dropped off at Susie Tolbert. This means closer pickup to the home. Now, there is reality that there are some parents that literally walked to school every day, that were down the street from the school. I would like to maintain that, and there's certainly an inconvenience for that parent. But I do believe that there are larger issues that need to be tackled with these boundary changes that at the minimum ensure that that public school that is down the street from a parent who now walks to school with their child will remain a public school and within our school system for the long term. And I do believe that at least for the younger sibling, the ability to walk the child to school remains. But for the older student, it may be having to ride a bus. But that's no different than the majority of our elementary children today.
And so now we're going to discuss our final program boundary change for this podcast. That's the JWJ ACT Center or ACT. What factors were considered when you identified this school for changes?
Well, the main challenge for us is that currently JWJ ACT only enables 200 students to participate in the program at the middle school level. Obviously, we have many more middle school students that can access the program, but based on the current agreement with EWC and Duval County Public Schools, we only have 200 seats. And so by moving the program to West Jacks, we go from 200 seats to 500 seats. And so we can have more students be involved in this program, which is obviously working when it comes to catching children up as far as credits are concerned so that they can return to the grade level or age cohort that they started elementary or middle school at. We also know that there's an opportunity for EWC to use the building. I would not be in favor of this recommendation if EWC was not using the building for educational purposes. So the commitment to the community to sustain the use of the building for educational purposes allows for a long-term commitment that that building continue to be accessible to parents, to the greater community on an educational basis. And I think it also allows EWC to expand its enrollment because it's challenged right now as far as facilities are concerned. And I think anytime two institutions, especially two educational institutions, can work together, there are multiple wins that come out of that scenario. And I think that's certainly the case with this proposal.
Now, and this is something, a buzz we've heard in the community, is there anything in the lease that's going to stop EWC from wanting to maybe possibly change that building into a charter school?
So there will be language in the contract that does not allow EWC to use the building as a charter school. We hope that we continue our partnership with EWC as far as future teacher development, so more teachers from EWC or more students at EWC become teachers or want to become teachers, study to become a teacher because we need teachers to employ. So that partnership could continue, but we are going to be very clear that the building cannot be used as a charter school.
So where will the students who are currently at the JWJ ACT Center go?
So those students would go to West Jacks, or they would go to a satellite site that offers the overage middle school activities.
So let's talk about the working group. What kind of information and feedback were you getting from your original proposal to what they came back with, and now what's the final proposal?
So after considering the West Jacks SP Livingston working group proposal, which rejected my original proposal on a 5-1 vote, but again, the minority vote did recommend that West Jacks be considered for the overage center. After that component, we engaged stakeholders from JWJ as part of the board policy working group process, and they voted on a 5-0 vote to support the recommendation to move the JWJ ACT program from that building to West Jacks.
And what would be the ages of the students going from JWJ ACT Center to West Jacksonville?
So right now, the majority of students at the JWJ ACT Center are middle school students. However, over the last 2 years, when we discontinued the STAR program, we had more 4th and 5th grade students enter the program. Because remember, those 4th and 5th graders aren't really the age of a 4th and 5th grader. They're really the age of a middle school student. So that's a misunderstanding sometimes when people hear 4th and 5th graders, they think of a traditional 4th or 5th grade age child. These are really middle school students that are still in 4th and 5th grade. So JWJ ACT, the program in moving to West Jacks, will continue to serve 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, but also 4th and 5th graders that really should be in 7th or 8th grade.
So the last two proposals, which would be the West Jacks and SP Livingston and now the JWJ ACT Center, those have not been voted on. When do they get voted on?
So they will be considered by the board for an official vote on May 3rd.
And what steps do you and your administration do between now and then to ensure that your proposal is voted in favor of these changes?
So we continue to respond to any emails that come in to myself or that go to board members and are routed to me for additional information. Obviously, email is probably the most efficient way to ask your questions or make your recommendations, but you can also call the school district building and talk to Pearl Rogiers, who's the Assistant Superintendent of School Choice, or you can even call my office and ask to speak to me. But again, the most efficient way to engage me at this point would be via email.
And you can get all of the information, the email addresses, the phone numbers. You can always get that at duvalschools.org. This has been another really informative episode of Real Talk. So for Vicky Pierre, I'm Matt Began, and thanks for listening.